Today we're going to be trying out 9 different watercolor techniques. Knowing different watercolor techniques is really important if you're working with watercolor because there's a lot of different things you can do with this type of media. So the first thing you do when you get your technique sheet is go ahead and write your name. I think there's some room here at the bottom. And the first technique we're going to do is really simple. It's called a flat wash. A flat wash is simply a wash of watercolor on top of your page. So I'm going to choose a brush here, and you may choose any color that you wish. And I'm going to gently wake up my paint. So I'm going to layer this onto my surface. If you want to, you could even do a little bit of mixing. Let's say I can do a flat wash with a little bit of color mixing here. Okay. Next, we have wet on dry. So wet on dry is kind of a two-step process. We can do some overlapping, and I'm gonna just start with one color, and then we'll come back later and paint on top of it. Next we have gradient. A gradient is a way of creating value with our watercolor. So we're going to start out by getting a deep value, and I think I'm going to use this dark pink. So I'm going to wake up this paint to create a really dark value. And I'm gonna start with that at the bottom, that deepest value that I can. Before this dries, I'm going to dip once into the water cup and add another little line. And I'm going to gradually begin to take out pigment until I get a very light pink, or whatever other color you're going to try. So that's the gradient. Wet on wet. For this one, we are going to start with a puddle of color, a puddle of water on our page, and then we're going to drop some color on top. So I'm gonna quickly get a puddle on my page, and before that soaks into my paper, I'm going to drop some color on, and I can even do different shades and let those mix. One of my favorite techniques. Okay, dry brush is where your brush is fairly dry and you can create texture with the bristles of your brush. I like to use a brush that's a little bit stiffer. You could use this one, and you can kind of just spread out the bristles a little bit. So I think I'm gonna try some green. This is a good one for grass or wood. And I just kind of want to spread it out to create dry brush. And even you could do some layers like so. All right, salt. Salt has a really interesting effect on watercolor. If we sprinkle it on top, the salt will pick up the pigment in the watercolor, and when it's dry, it will create this awesome texture. Salt is great for creating stars in the sky, or even looking like reflections on water. So I think I'm going to use some blue in my wash. So I'm going to start with the trick with the salt is you have to drop it on while the watercolor is still really puddly and wet. So you just take a sprinkle and sprinkle it on. You don't need very much. and the effect will happen when that is dry. Moving on to lifting, we're going to add a wash to the surface, and we can lift the paint up with different kinds of tools. We can use a sponge, we can even use a piece of paper towel or plastic wrap. So let's just see how this can work. So I can kind of let it soak in, and then I can simply lift. And different tools have different effects, but we're kind of lifting the color out of the page. So you can see it makes it kind of lighter. Paper towel can leave a different texture as well. Moving on to the resist. We can create a resist with a couple different things. You can use crayon. So I can add some white crayon to part of it. I can use oil pastel. And I can even create a resist with a piece of masking tape. So I'm gonna lay on a piece of masking tape, and then I can paint over it. I would suggest taking that masking tape off after it's fairly dry. Finally, for alcohol, alcohol will create a really interesting effect on top of watercolor. So what you're gonna do is you're going to saturate the surface with a wash, and you can use a Q-tip or one of these little droppers, and you're simply going to drop the alcohol right on top of the wet surface. Just for fun, I'm gonna do a little color mixing. All you need is a drop, and when you drop it on, you'll create a really cool shape. Now that our wet on dry is finished, I can go back with another color right on top, and I would just use a smaller brush for this part so that you can create some interesting details. Whatever you want to do is fine here. So you can see I'm using that brush to create some crisp edges on those shapes. I can also take off the masking tape when that's dry to reveal what's underneath. You can see that there's a little bit of a little bleed from underneath, and sometimes the tape will peel off parts of the paper, but you get what you get.